We are up to Daf Mem Gimel Amid Aleph. Just a quick synopsis of what we're up to. We first discussed the concept of shlichus. Where do we learn shlichus from? And then we just going to brief synopsis of what we did yesterday. And then we discussed that there are exceptions that shlichus doesn't always work. For example, ein shlichus bar vera. We wanted to know, how do we know that? We started out talking about it. There's a logic to it. Because the sender can say, Divrei harav, divrei talmud, divrei mishaymin. I was sure that this person would listen to his master, which is Hashem, rather than to me. So I never expected him to follow my instructions. And then we brought that there are actually two psukim where it says that yeshlich vaver. One is by Me'ilah, stealing from Hegdish, which only takes place when you're not aware. And there we say the sender is the one who's liable. They didn't realize the money was hektish money. So yeshlich varvera. And the other exception was by shlichus yad. If you're a shomer and you're guarding something, and if I send a shliach, and let's say I'm a shomer chinam, which means basically I'm exempt from all liabilities except negligence. But if I then go ahead and make a kinyan transaction on this item that I'm meant to watch, and I'm kinyan, then no matter what happens to it, even if it's an accident, I'm responsible. So if I ask my shliach to lift a barrel of wine, I am also responsible, which is based Hillel's opinion. So there's another exception. So there are two psukim that say yeshlich, automatically we know that everywhere else ain't shlich v'avera. But then you had Beishamai. He says al kol dvar pesha comes to teach you not regarding a shliach, but rather that the mere thought that you had, and you expressed it in words, so we know what your thoughts are. Dvar, words, the mere thought that you had to use this barrel for your own purpose already makes you totally responsible. So we say for him also we have another pasuk which is tvicha mechira. You stole an animal and then you slaughtered it and you sold it. So the din is you pay 4 or 5 times depending if it's a sheep or if it's a cow. And over there we say tavachai oy mechara, teach you that if you ask a shliach to go ahead and shech the animal on your behalf, you're liable. So we have two psukim, even according to Beishamai, which is Me'ilah and Tzvichim Bechira. According to Basil, we have 3 psukim. So now we're up to the Gemara. The Gemara is going to ask, and remember, we always bring up this opinion that says that the fact that a Torah repeats something twice is insufficient to say that Torah is limiting only to these 2. So according to Beis Shammai, he says there are only 2 psukim, Tzvichim Bechira and Tzvichim Bechira and Me'ilah. Or according to Beis Hill, that maybe he doesn't agree with Tzvichim Mechira, so therefore he only has 2 psukim, Me'ilah and Shlichus Yad. How come we say Ein Shlichus V'Avera? Let's learn from there. Yes, Shlichus V'Avera. So we obviously have to find another pasuk. Says the Gemara, we're about 6 lines at the top of the page. Says the Gemara, about 7 lines. This all makes sense. According to the opinion, repeat them twice. You can't learn from there anymore. The one that said that even the 2 psukim you can still learn out. What can you say? Says the Gemara, we have another pasuk. The law is that if you take a carbon and you take it outside in your shalim, outside the base of Mikdash, facing the base of Mikdash, but instead of bringing the carbon up inside the base of Mikdash, you bring it outside the base of Mikdash. There's a chiyuv, a liability of kares. And there the pasuk says that dam yechoshev, dam yechoshev leishahu. It's as if this person spilled our blood. Dam shafachu, he spilled our blood. So it says who. What do you mean by it says leish hahu? What do you mean that person? Obviously, who else is going to be liable if you go ahead and shecht outside? Must be hu v'lo shluchai. Dam shafach hu v'lo shluchai. So we say what? You're the one who's liable, but not your shliach. In other words, from here you learn out that ein shliach ledvar avera. Says the Gemara Ashkan. So we find gabe shchutei chutz b'chol hatayda min nolan. All we know is that shchutei chutz is ein shliach avera. Fine. But what's it do with the rest of the Torah? In fact, you have 2 other psukim that says Yashlich Dvar Avera. Gemara says the Yalid b'Shchutei Chutz. We compare to Shchutei Chutz. What do you mean? The Yalid b'Shchutei Chutz. Why compare to Shchutei Chutz? Neilif Mahanach. Learn from the other 2. According to the view that says that 2 psukim does not come to limit. On the contrary, we can learn from there and emulate it. Let's learn the same thing from Me'ilah and Tzvichim Mechira. Let's say that Yashlich Dvar Avera. Says the Gemara, because by shchutei chutz you have twice the word hahu, that person. The Torah then writes again in that very pasuk. It says that person is It says dam yechashel leishahu. It's considered blood for that person. Then again, it says v'nichlis ishahu, that person will be cut off. What do you again that person? We ready. Whatever you had to learn from the first one, we already know. You don't need to tell me that what, but you are not a shliach. You already told us that from the first time. We know the rest of the as well. So more that's now a question the reverse, which we don't have that often. So the man, the snakes over get that two going to come to teach what? Since we already know. And that is why I told you yesterday that some Rishonim who feel that the conclusion of the Gemara is how do you know the concept of ancient Raveda from a logic? But others learn from this Gemara right here that no, we learn it from the fact that you have two psukim that tell you there's an exception. Yesh so automatically we know, but everywhere else, it's like there's a custom. And we gave a whole bunch of nafkaminas halacha. Just to remind you, one of them is, for example, if the shliach had no idea there was an aveira involved, you asked to bring me that sheep over there, it's mine. He had no idea that you're actually stealing it. So if the word is divrei harava, divrei tamlin mishamin, how in the world is he meant to know that the Eibishter is opposed to this? He didn't know there was an aveira here. Then we would say yes, there's aveira. But if it's exeris hakassav that there's no shlichus when there's an aveira involved, that the Eibishter did not give me the power to be a shliach when there's an aveira involved, then he's not a shliach. He'll be liable, even though it's not his fault. So the Gemara asked that question. The man, the one who said that. So why do you need another pasuk to tell you that ancient Varveda? If we're learning from a Savada, what's wrong with having a pasuk? You know how many times we already had in Kiddushin Daf, hey, that's things which we can learn from logic. The Torah wrote it down. What's the most question? The question is because we're already learning it from the fact that there are two psukim that tell you that there's an exception, which means everywhere else, ancient Varveda. What I need another pasuk for to tell me ancient Varveda. So that's why other Rishonim learn differently than what they learned before. My daughter, but what did they do with Ahu? We need another pasuk for. So my answer is Chad one lemuute to exclude Shnayim she'oichzim besachtim v'shachtim. Two people are shechting outside the base of Mikdash. They're not liable. Now the Ritva asks a question here, which actually interesting how it's negates the laws of Shabbos, and you find it here. The Ritva asks a question: why do I need a pasuk to tell me that two people commit an aveda that shech that they're exempt? Don't we have a rule Shnayim shesub turin that if two people do an aveda is potter? Where do we have this concept of Shnayim shesub turin? Only Gemara Shabbos. The Gimel Aleph, later Tzadiks, from the pasuk ba'asoisa yochid oisois says kula v'lo Shnayim shesub. That if two people do an aveda, but normally we learn it's limited to the laws of Shabbos. The Ritva asking this question right here clearly indicates to us it's a law in Kol HaTorah Kula that Shnayim Shasub Turin, which is a fascinating concept, not brought down in Shalach, obviously, whether in Kol HaTorah Kula, if you go ahead with this concept, so two people steal together, Shnayim Shasub Turin, everything, that you put them out or not, which is an interesting thing. Anyhow, the Ritva answers here we would have thought is different because we have a pasuk says ish and whatever. The chadu, and the other one is the loy onusu, that the other ahu is teach you who, not if he was forced into it, v'loy shegig, not if it was a shegig, v'loy muta, not if it was a mistake. Now, why you need a pasuk v'loy onus? We already learned l'nayda l'sasa kol dover that if a person doesn't evade it, he's forced into it, you're exempt. Except the three Avedas, let's say, but everywhere else you're exempt. And even those three Avedas, we had a machlekes if we did it, what happens? So what do you need a pasuk for? And shaygig. If you're a shaygig, you're actually not potter, you're being karmachatas. In fact, we'll learn in Krisis, the first mission, all those chatois are the ones that are linked to Araver with Karis. So actually, the main purpose is v'loy muta, where you thought that there's nothing wrong, and that's a chiddush that you're exempt. It has to be conscious. And once we brought muta, we already brought the other ones in this train. So that's what you need the pasuk for. Sorry, yeah, that's true. The idach and the other one says mehu hahu. The other one says I learned everything. I used the pasuk ancient Raveda, and plus it could have said who. Now saying hahu twice teaches you what you just said. Ahu and not if it's an oin, if it's forced. Ahu only you and not two people do it together. Think about the idach and the other one who somebody who ahu like that. She doesn't believe that hey is lends itself to a drasha. Says the Gemara, how did we learn? Somebody says to his agent, say haroiges hanefesh. If you contract, you get a killer to go out there and kill somebody, an assassin. Who chayiv v'sholcha potter? You are chayiv, and the sender's potter. If you actually pay the contractor, there's a whole different story. Some people say that they're already. It's not a question of Eishes already. Yes, already. If it's a svara of divrei harav, the divrei talmud mishoymin, how can you say that when you pay the money? Then what would you take the money for? Obviously the money to do the job. So you knew he'll do the job. So you could then we would say shlichus aveda. But if it's exeris hakosov that says you can never have shlichus, there's no concept of shlichus when aveda is involved. So then you cannot say sorry. Even if you pay the person money, he's a contract killer. You still don't have to the guy is not liable. Shammai Hazaken, the Chiddush in Shammai Hazaken says, interesting expression, Shammai Hazaken. Mishum Chage Hanovi, in the name of Chage Hanovi, Shol Chav Chayev. Shammai Hazaken says, in the name of Chage Hanovi, that when it comes to killing is an exception, that we don't know an exception. When it comes to killing, the Mishalech is liable. It says, when David HaMelech sent Uriah Hittite to the front so that he can marry Bathsheba, Nosan Hanavi reprimanded him and he said, you killed him with the sword of the soldiers of Ammon, as if they are your shliach. So we see, yes, shliach is there when it comes to murder. My time in the shower, Zakin. What's that's a good question. There's a discussion that Nachrein never seen on the show. The question he asked was that what about the shliach? Even according to Shammai, is the shliach culpable as well, or is he innocent totally? Or like two people sharing the same avera here? We'll see. Well, the Gemara's conclusion, the shliach would definitely be liable because he did the killing. We'll see in a minute. In this case here, the shliach is liable to the goyim. Says the Gemara, what's the svara Shammai? The Mepharshim have a difficult time understanding what's more asking what the svara Shammai. He just told you why. It says by David HaMelech, what do you mean? That's his basis. But the Gemara wants more. They want to tease out of it. Maybe there's a passing the Torah. Snake, Gemara says, he holds snakes. You have two exceptions. Where there's where there is a shlich aveda, and he holds he can learn from others. But and then we brought the pasuk about sexting outside, and we learned from the word ahu that ein shlich aveda. He says she doesn't learn the extra a. And what does he do with the ahus? He uses it to tell you that if two people do it together, they're not liable. That if it was an oinus, if you were forced into it, you're not liable. That's one logic. So now Shammai holds yes shlich aveda when it comes to murder. Ibai say another answer is lo'ilam darish. Of course, he holds ein shlich aveda. So what happened with David Melech? Well, my chayiv b'din shemayim. Now, what if it would have been a shlich? The shlich definitely would be liable. But the shlich also here is culpable. You're not innocent here. If b'din shemayim, you better do tshuva. So one asks. So that means that Tanakama holds you're not even liable to the shemayim, but you're totally innocent. I hired a contract killer, or I got someone to kill somebody else, and I'm totally innocent. How can I be? Miklal the Tanakama so the shemayim. Ami pato, you go scot free. Eladina Rabba, the Dina Zuta, Ikebenayu. The difference is how severe the punishment is. According to the Kama, the Mishalech, of course he's not an innocent bystander, but since he didn't do it, and he can really say over here, murder. Everyone knows that murder, how awful it is. So therefore, I can say I didn't really think he did it. Of course, I'm culpable because I sort of gave you maybe an incentive or I convinced you. But according to Bishama, wow, it's a terrible sin, and in Dina Rabba, you'll get terrible punishments if you don't do tshuva. Or I can say here's different. That in this story, the Goli Rachmana. Now this makes it a little bit hard to understand. We knew that from the beginning. So we said that we were looking for something better. So now we settled back to what we knew in the beginning. So what changed? What changed? And now we're saying because the pasuk clearly says that here you are liable. Says the Gemara, another one. Those who don't learn from there, who say it's only in Shemayim, it says clearly that David HaMelech is guilty. No, the pasuk doesn't mean he's guilty. On the contrary, the pasuk means you killed him in Ammon, and if you're not guilty, whatever they do, you're not liable for. You're not guilty. Why was no guilty? I mean, what happened here? He sent Uriah Hittite he told Uriah Hittite to go home with your wife and celebrate. And Uriah Hittite says, "How can I celebrate when my brethren are out there in the front, putting their lives in jeopardy on behalf of Klal Yisrael?" So David sent him to the front, and he got killed. So he deserved to be killed. My time moided b'malchus haba. It was treason. The Karmelech. Why? Because he said, "Ba'adoni Yov." He said he says, "Adoni Yoav, my master Yoav, my general Yoav," and he called him my master. The Avde Adoni and the rest of your servants, the soldiers, are all out there in the field waging a battle, waging a war, and I should go home and party. So what exactly was the Bridva Malchus? The Rashi says the fact that you referred to your general as my master in front of the king, who's really the ultimate master. That's the thing. Other Rishonim don't like that because they say, isn't that in a way The Rebbe always used to say that Malcha Hamlochim is greater than the Melech. So if you're an emperor, you're greater than a king. If you say my master, the general, who is the servant of the king, in fact, you're elevating the king itself. That's how great is the king, that even my master, you're the master of my master. So the others want to say that the Merida b'Malchus was that he disobeyed David. David told him to go home and party, and he refused for the best possible reasons. But that's the fact is, when a king tells you, you have to comply with the wishes of the king. Same Tashim Alechamel, you have to listen. And others say that he said that the problem was the prioritizing. He says Adoni Yoav, in the passage begins Adoni Yoav, and so on and so forth. They should have said the Avde Hamelech Adoni Yoav. Should have said first to refer to the king and then refer to the general. Anyway, so there's nothing wrong here. If you want, according to the explanation we said before, that Shammai holds, so he holds that what? That when it comes to murder, literally in a capital punishment court, and he learns it out from Elon Tzvicha, and he holds that two psukim do teach you. Nevertheless, Shammai will concede, but if he tells us shliach, say you ba'olas erba, I want you to go ahead and live with someone that's forbidden to live with. I want you to eat treif of fats. In this case, definitely the shliach is liable. I sent you to eat treif on my behalf. So if you hold yesh shliach dvar, would you say in that case, maybe the shliach is liable, but the shalech is also liable because yesh shliach dvar. Potter. Why? If you're benefiting from your Aveda, there's no way that the sender who has no benefit from your Aveda should be liable in any sense of the word. Sounds like even Bedin Shemayim, he's not liable. The Mishalech is not liable. So Teish already asked the whole idea of Meila. Meila is you use the money of Hegdish for yourself. And who's liable? The Mishalech. If nobody knew with Hegdish money at the time. I told you, go buy me a shirt. So or whatever I tell you, sit in this house. So the shliach is having hana, and the shliach is chayv. So Taisha says the meila is not taking place when you have hana. The moment you make the kinyan, even before you had hana from it, you're already liable for meila because you've transferred it from the domain of hegdish to the domain of chulin, and that's the aveda. There's no hana involved. Hana comes afterwards. Talking about it further, each we learned, and I want the issue we're talking about. Here. What about Rav Omar Shliach Naseh? You sent a Shliach to go ahead and do something for you, let's say for Kiddushin. Can he then turn around and become one of the Eidim to say, yes, that he married this girl here? Or let's say he sent money to through a Shliach, and he turned out to be the Eid. Yes, this Malva, this lender, received the money because I'm the one who gave it to him. In a way, he's better than an ordinary person. He's not just a bystander, an outsider. He was the one involved. Well, let's say he sends two shluchim. There you have your two agents right there. So Rav says, shliach naseh, why not? V'ed Abshela Amri ain't shliach naseh. The shliach cannot become an aid. Why? Why? V'ed Abshela Elema. Why can't you? Elema is it amalei haveli aid? Because for now he didn't tell him. He should have be my shliach. He never told him you should be my aid. And now he says, when do you have to tell somebody you have to be my aid? If you married a woman, okay, you're getting engaged to a woman in front of two people. Well, you didn't tell them you're my witness. It's not Kiddushin. El Rav Omar Shliach, not Rav says Shliach not say on the contrary, he's better than an ordinary aid because he was involved. He knows exactly what happened. And because we know that a lot of times they do these tests where they in front of a class they have people acting out a certain event. Then they tell each person write down what you saw. And they find quite a disparity between the different descriptions of events. Everyone saw exactly the same event, but people see things differently. What's the emphasis, the accents on this, and so on and so forth. So but if the person's involved, he knows exactly what happened and what he gave and how much he gave and what the mood was and so on. It should be a better rate. However, ain't shlich nasa can't. Why not? Because he now acts as if he is the person. Have like a goofer. How can you testify about yourself? So Rabbi Yosef Engel there explains that the argument is, how do we understand shlichus? As we know, there are 3 steps in shlichus, but yesterday we were going to talk about 2. We'll talk about these 2 because also the CDH, the Baramash and others, they talk about 2, and that is that the ma'aser, the act of the shliach, benefits the mishalech, or the shliach becomes the mishalech, and that's the argument Rav and Abshela. Rav says it's the ma'aser of the shliach that now credits the Mishalech. But the Shlich himself is a separate person, so he can be an aid about the event. It's as if he's a stranger. He's talking about the event. But according to Reb Shela, the Shlich becomes the Mishalech. If the Shlich becomes the Mishalech, how can the Shliach testify about himself? The Rashba has a whole tshuva, the Muftalation, it explains that Rashba has a whole tshuva where he talks about his shlichus. The shliach is giving over his abilities to the Mishalech, and the Mishalech is giving over his abilities to the shliach. Or others say, the Machlek the Tzaddik explains the Rambam in the Torah about if a person, becomes crazy after he sent out the shliach to give a get to his wife, can the shliach still give it? Did the shliach give all of his powers in the shliach that moment that he appointed the shliach? And the shliach acts on his own, or that every single second the mishalech is the shliach is acting the mishalech, and therefore now this minute the mishalech is a shaita. How can the shliach give the get? And again, they want to sort of connect these chakiras to the chakira b'yesef angle, but that's how we explain it. Another thing is, and this is the big machlek of the we'll have a makkah above, and many other places, and that is. He says, since when do you have to appoint shluchim as an aid? Seems to me, here you never have to say atem eidai. Two shluchim see a get, you don't say atem eidai. The Ritva here and in Makkah Tavav and other places talks about, but if there are kravim or psulim who are witnessing, let's say the chuppah, if there are relatives there or people who are postulators are witnessing the chuppah, then you have to say atem eidai. Big machlekes. When you say in that case, why is atem eidai? In the exclusion of the pasuk. What happens when you say atameda? Are you also excluding the kosher people? What happens? There's a dispute later on, but you can't find the two Eidim that were there by the Kiddushin. But there were many other people there, not relatives, not psulim, but they were there. But you clearly said atem edai. So what happens there? Big machlek is that excludes everybody or it excludes those people, and because the Ritva Nizishaim hold that by Kiddushin you need to nominate atem edai because the Kar apostle can ruin it. Now, why can they ruin it? Don't invite them to court. If there's ever a dispute, just invite the kosher peoples. What's the big deal? If there's a murder and there were kosher apostle there, that's it. The whole case falls apart. Of course not, because when it comes there, the edus is normally to testify what happened. So when does that happen? When it comes to court. So therefore, you make sure you don't listen to the krayv psulim. But by Kiddushin, even if we know 100%, the husband comes and the wife comes to court and they both admit that they got married, there's no Kiddushin. If there's no two witnesses, why? Because the purpose of the witnesses here is not just to be Eidei Bidder, to verify what happened. They're Eidei Kiyim. They're actually part of the whole exercise. How do we, as we learn of Samacheled, how do we have the power, that Papa says, to actually answer her on the rest of the world? That's a power vested in witnesses. So therefore, they make it happen at the time of the function. If the Apsulim or Kravim there at the time, it's because they're all there, they can actually rule it. That's the view of the Ritva. Taisvis and other Rishonim hold no. Even in that case over there, the fact is the Kar apostle, it has no impact whatsoever on the thing itself because it starts there, but it doesn't end there. It ends when you come to court. So don't invite the Kar apostle and nothing happened. And therefore they say you don't have to say Atamedai and it doesn't matter. Anyway, the whole discussion becomes from right here. Talking about it further, I'll ask a question. She said to three people, two go out there, each go out there and Mekadosh meet this woman. B'Shamai says, if a person says three people, I make you shluchim. One of them remains the shliach, and the other two become the edim. So what do we see clearly from B'Shamai? That the shluchim cannot be edim. So only one is the shliach and the edim. And B'Shil says, no, call them shluchim. They're all shluchim. The ein shliach nasa edim. So both of them hold that a shliach cannot become an aid. But Beishamai says, even though you clearly said to three of them shluchim, since we don't need three shluchim, two of them will act as aidim. And Beishamai says, no, if I nominate them to be shluchim, I designate them to be shluchim, that's where they all are. But two people, everyone holds, if I would have told two people go out there, they're not the aidim. That means that they hold shlich and shlich nasa aid, a kasha nav. So the Gemara says, we have another Tana that seems to learn that shlich, yes, becomes an aid. The Tana learned that Nosnaim. His version of the argument Sham Hill is very different. The Beishamai says, shliach ve'aid echad. Beishamai says that the shliach can be one of the aidim, so you need another aid and then one shliach. And Beisil says, shliach v'shnei aidim, that the shliach cannot be an aid. So it doesn't really help us. According to, that Rav, who says that a shliach being an aid follows Beishamai. Because according to Beis Hillel, if you send three people, you need a shliach and you need two Eidim, you can't, any of the shluchim cannot be Eidim. So Kasha Rav, but Rav ki Beishamai, swap it around. That Beis Hillel is the one that says that the shliach becomes an aid, and Beishamai is the one that says they can. And Rav, how will follow Beis Hillel, according to Rav Nosson. However, Rabbi Mas, he learned that the argument is the other way around. Rabbi Amar ain't shlich nase aid. Ve'Rab Shelama shliach nase. Shliach could become an aid. The shliach nase aid. The shliach can become an aid. The shliach can be a witness. Nachman, so continue on the subject. Nachman Amalish said two people to the Kitchuli Isha. He says to two people, go out there and find me a zivug, find me a collar. Hein shluchav, hein edav. Exactly what we just said. The shliach can become an aid, but then he continues. The chein begerishin, the same thing would apply to divorce, and the chein bedini mamla, the same thing by mamlas. If I send two people to pay up the malva, I send them a shliach, they can also be the adim. Now, the obvious question is, why do you have to specify each one? Once you told us the principle that a shliach can be an aid, then why wouldn't it work by gittin? Why wouldn't it work by mammon? You have to highlight these two others. No, we need to inform you that it works in all of these instances. Why? The Kiddushin, if I tell you Kiddushin, by Kiddushin, what am I doing? What are they doing? They're coming to say that she is forbidden to the whole world. So, is there any personal benefit to these shluchim? Absolutely not. So therefore, they can be trustworthy. They're observers. They're objective. But when it comes to divorce, maybe there's a bias here because one of them wants to marry this woman. He wants to marry her. How do you know you can trust these two shluchim to be edim? So the Shonim ask. So how can you ever trust edim when it comes to gittin? What does that have to hear? How can you ever have to? How can you even think that we cannot trust the Eidim when it comes to Gittin? Because maybe they have a bias here because they're interested. We already said in other Gemaras that we're not worried because two people, you need two Eidim, and one of them can only marry her. So what's the other person's benefit? But notice here is saying that we are concerned that there's a bias here, that maybe the prejudice or somehow or another. No, so how can you ever trust Gittin? So the word is, of course, we trust the Eidim when it comes to Gittin, but because they're much more involved here. They're much more invested in this case here because they are the shluchim, and maybe they got to know her a bit before. And it's not just a stranger signing a piece of a document, something. So maybe we're here, maybe we were. That's what we would have thought. And I can argue, okay, if there are two people there, why would the other person lie? What does he have in it? When it comes to money, maybe they're both liars. They both have, and they both decided we're going to keep the money ourselves. We're going to lie about that we gave it to the Malva. We'll go keep it ourselves. We'll split the money. So if to say that, well, we trust in all cases. What exactly is the psul? We said before that the one who says that ain shliach nas because shliach shalom k'moisei becomes like the mishalech, and therefore he cannot testify. Why not? Why couldn't he? He's in a gay be'edus. In all of these cases, we say we're worried about the gay beta. What is it? What's exactly the psul in the gay betas? So the big machlekes the poskim malan afmin halacha. Is the problem of the gay betas is then you're talking about yourself, and what's wrong with talking about myself? Is it because I'm a korav? You can't have a relative, so therefore I'm a relative, or is it because we're worried that you're lying? You're choshed. Because when it comes to yourself, you see things differently. That you the very same act by somebody else, you're going to be critical of. But if you do it, you have a million excuses why me is different. So is the vart because it's exeris hakasav? You're a relative to yourself, so how can you testify by yourself? Or is the vart because we don't trust you, and that's why you can't be. Anyway. They want to say that in itself is the machlekes between the two of eid nasa and if a shliach nasa eid or not. If the word is, let's say, even if you want to say that shliach shalom kamoisa means mamashim shalech, but if the word is because he's a korav, okay, so he's a korav, he can't testify. If the word is that he's in a lie, but since it's not for his own benefit, he's getting her engaged for the other guy in real life. Why would we be choshed that he's lying? What did he gain from the lying? The shliach. So in this case, even though he's a shlich idem shalech, then the gay beta doesn't bother us. We're not choshed that he is lying. So
we have a reputation of a good shliach.
Well, okay, so maybe that's the argument. You can argue that as well. But at least you can understand, even according to the shita to me that shlich and mamish kamaisa, you can still see that two sides of the coin. Says Gemara, if we need all three. Okay, so now let's talk about mammons. Gemara, Micah Sava. Remember, if the Adim have a vested interest, you cannot trust them because they're no longer saying Adis objectively. So Micah Sava. They asked, I think it was Yonis Neighbors, he was like 6 years old. He said that a relative can't be an aid and pashtus forget about the guy told about the chakira, because he can't trust it. They're going to help. So they ask, but if the relative is saying is condemning his relative, then why can't you trust the edus? He's not lying because why would he condemn his relative? So they asked him. So he says, "Mafresh pasuk." The pasuk says, "Va'amdu shnei anoshim," that the two witnesses are called mention. Any relative who's there to condemn his relative in front of a court is not a mention, so therefore can't be counted. Says the Gemara, Maikasab. What does he hold? Ikasavar he holds, and let's see that these shluchim have no vested interest. If he holds, the only way you can pay off your loan is if the malva went out of his way to make sure there were two witnesses. In other words, he's saying, I don't trust you. So you think he'll get paid without two witnesses? And you think the labor is going to pay back without two witnesses? You don't trust me, I don't trust you. And therefore you have to have witnesses. No. So the only way that the labor can say, I paid back the malva is if he has witnesses. Otherwise, the Malva can say, I don't trust you, and he'll still claim that you owe me money, or vice versa. So then these witnesses are Negeb Edis. Why? How are they Negeb? Because if they say, we never paid the Malva, these two would say, we never paid the Malva. What happens then? Well, the labor says, look, I gave you $1,000 to pay the Malva. I need two witnesses that he was paid. You didn't pay him, give him back my money. So the only way that these two witnesses are scot-free, they don't have to pay back the money to the Levi, is if they prove that Malva received the money. And the only way they can prove that Malva received the money is that they testify. No, then they gave a davar. They're testifying about themselves to exonerate themselves from paying again. You have the Amri Loi Parinu, Amalu Paruni, pay me. So they have a vested interest. You have to say, there's a big machlekes how to learn Gemara. We'll learn this way. That you don't have to pay back. You don't have to pay back with Edim. And therefore, they are trusted. These are they're objective. Why? Because they can say whatever they want, and either way they're exonerated. They can say this is the labor, we give it back the money. They can say the malva, we paid you, and either way they're exonerated because they have no responsibility. Whatever they say happened to the money, we'll believe them. So therefore, these shluchim can be edim. Said Gemara, but now the tikkun rabbanan shu hesed, if somebody makes a claim from you that you have to swear. So if the labor says, hey, if you didn't give him the money, you never gave me back the money, swear. So now, if the only way they can get out of a shvua, they no longer have the two choices. They either have to testify they gave the money, otherwise they have to swear to the labor. So the only way they can exonerate themselves is by giving testimony they gave it to the malva. So they gave it again. So now that the rabbanan established shvua is hesed a shvua, that you have to convince that today the Rav Nachman came along and said we're making a shul. He says that if I say you owe me $100, you claim you owe me nothing. My taita claim for hakol, you're exempt. But now we made a shul hesed, swear that you owe me nothing. In that case, mishtabe hani eidin yavinalei mishtabe. So then what happens? So then we can no longer trust them. You no longer say these shluchim can be the eidin because they have a vested interest. So what happens in this case over here, where the two shluchim say we gave it to the malva, the malva never got it. So it's very similar to a case where a guy says we'll have this being b'mitzvah, and later on also others say if a guy says to a storekeeper, I owe these are my employees, instead of me paying them $100 this week, instead of Pesach, whatever, give them credit $100. The storekeeper says, I gave it to them, I gave him reimbursement, and these employees said we never received it. What happens? So because he wasn't careful, whatever it is, they both swear and they both collect. So the same thing over here, in this case here, the state of limbo. The shluchim say, we gave the money to the malva. So we're putter. The malva says, I never received it, pay me again. So because he didn't take the right precautions, is hani aidin the mishtabe hani aidin the avinale. So these two witnesses say, we gave it to the malva, so they walk away scot-free. They don't have to swear because the swearing is only from the person who made a claim, but they're not saying that we gave it back to you. And the malva that swears, I never received it. The malva has to pay the malva. Second one further, it says in the Mishnah, a man can be Mekadesh's daughter. We learned over there. We learned over there that a girl, a naira, is between 12 and 12 and a half. If she's engaged, once she's married, then the father loses all contact with her. While she's engaged, the father still has rights. He can annul her in the Dorim. If she works, whatever it is, of course, to the father. So naira hamarasa, according, it says in the Mishnah later on, it says that a naira hamarasa, we had a get, sorry, that a naira hamarasa, the avia mekablas gita. She can receive the get as well as the father. When it comes to Kiddushin, we'll see in a minute what the din is. But when it comes to Gittin, She or her father can receive the get. You can't have two people receiving a get. The father receives the get, and that's it. And that's number one. Number two, if she's too young, she doesn't understand what a divorce is, and she continues, goes back to her husband, thinking that's still her husband, and then cannot be divorced even by the father. She's not mature enough yet to understand what a divorce is. The same argument we have when it comes to Gittin, the exact same argument comes to Kiddushin. Reish Lakish says.
She's still involved in the process.
So when a Tana,
she doesn't understand.
we're talking about a Tana here. A Tana, the father can receive the get. I mean, by Naira, of course, you understand. Even like Tana, she's 5, 6 years old. She doesn't really understand what's going on there. Maybe when she's 10, 11, she does. Because the dinim of Gittin still apply. And the din is that it has to be b'shilcha base. You have to send her away from home. It's a one-way street. But if she keeps on coming back, it's not a get. Because the Torah uses the word shilcha. So the Shlaki says by Kiddushin exactly the same thing, which is that what? According to Tanakama, the Naira can collect her own Kiddushin as well. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't have two people collecting. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Machlekes legadishin. Only when it comes to Gittin do we have maybe the girl can accept it. But the Kiddushin, when it comes to Kiddushin, divrei hakol avi avalahi. Now there's a big machlekes when it comes to Gittin. It says in Naira Marosa she can collect according to the company. What about a Tana? So Rashi, very interesting. Rashi contradicts himself, and Tesa says that Rashi changed his mind. But if you look in the Rashi, 2 lines above the wide lines, right when the Gemara begins, Naira Hamarasa, Rashi says clearly, who had din liktana? The same thing applies to a young girl, whether she can receive her own get. She's 10 years old, but she was married, her father married her off. Now the husband gives a get, she can receive it on behalf of the father, but she receives it. So how come we're only talking about a Naira? That even though she's a Naira, she's an adult, and the Chiddush is a whole, she cannot receive her own get. Like Tana, of course she cannot. It's simple to understand that she cannot receive it, but even a Naira. That's what Rashi says here. But 4 lines further down the page, Rashi says, exactly 4 lines further down, Rashi says, V'davka Naira, only by a Naira. Only a Naira can receive her get. Avo Ketana, but when it comes to Ketana, Aviha V'lahi, only the father can receive the get, not the daughter. So the Tosha says that Rashi changes his mind, and the first Rashi is the later one, that it applies to Ketana as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but there it's talking about Mekadesh. Now we're talking about Gittin. By Mekadesh, as beating the Satilish as a Chiddush is that even a Naira, when she has some independence, the father is in control. But we're talking about Gittin, you get different. So, Gemara continues. My time, but what is the logic of Rabbi Yechon according to Rabbanon? Why Taka? Does Rabbanon hold that the daughter can collect as well? That the daughter can receive her get, and the same thing applies. The daughter can receive a get. Why Taka? What's a different Gerushin Kiddushin? Of course, it's the same thing. She's an adult, she's independent, so she can receive her own Kiddushin, receive her own Gittin. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, she can receive her own get, but she cannot receive her own Kiddushin. What's the difference? He says like this. When it comes to Gittin, what is she doing? She is now going back home, giving back all the rights to her father, the Ben Avia. She's helping her father out, so then she should do it as well. And could be that she's merely the hand of the father. Or the Kiddushin, what are you accomplishing when she accepts Kiddushin from a man? She's leaving her father. Her father is losing some of the rights. For example, to know the Nadarim, it's now the father together, with the husband, jointly. The Mafkas Atzim the trajectory is that she's leaving her father's Ashus, and then only the father has the right to pardon her, not she herself. Telling mother about that's so the whole distinction you're telling me according to Bechin is whether she's leaving her father's Ashus, then only the father can do it, or she's going back and then she can also do it, right? Like you get in, even the Naira can accept it herself. So that's a question. Very minor. When let's say her husband died and now she's waiting, her husband died from while they were merely engaged, because once she got married, the father's out of the picture. She's merely engaged, and now she's waiting for her brother-in-law to come. And the Rabbanan said that if the So Matayda, it's only through intimacy, bia. But Midrabanan, if one of the brothers give her a ring, for example, she accepts, then even though it's only Rabbanan, what it does is it excludes all the other brothers from being involved. The also, what's happening? She's going to leave, a finality from the father's rishus. Right now, she's sort of going to stay in limbo. But now there's another man involved in her life, and she's leaving her father. And now it says clearly, Tana, that when it comes to a Tana, let's say she was married by her father and then the husband died and she's waiting, only the father can accept the Maimer, only the father's consent. Or the father can, but a Naira, it comes to Maimer, can do it herself. Now the question is, but she's leaving her father. You just said by Kiddushin, it's only the father can do it according to Rabbi Yechon. So why Maimer is different? Isn't Maimer Kiddushin the same thing? If anything, this is how we understand Rabbi Yechon. My time, Rabbi Yechon, what's talking this for? Why should there be a difference between Kiddushin and Gittin? Kiddushin, not the word is leaving your father's domain or entering, but Kiddushin, the Medaita, Kiddushin can only take place if she consents. So the father is in control. He has to be the one to consent. Avia v'lohi. But Gedushin, when it comes to divorce, the Baal Karcha, when it comes to divorce, we don't need anybody's consent. So what's the difference if the father ends up with the get or the daughter ends up with the get? And the father in the get, he has a say in the matter? Not at all. Bain Avia. So the question resumes, Hare Maimer. Well, what about Maimer? The Medaita, Maimer is like Kiddushin. In other words, you need her consent. And yet it says clearly that she can accept it. Talking about Hasim over there, we're talking about we're talking about a case where it's taka against the will, and there the chiddush and according to Rebbe, who says that a maimer bal korcha is effective, and that's when we're saying that it's no different than a get. We don't need the father to receive it; the daughter can receive it. What's this, Rebbe? The time we learned how is a maimer b'vemtes? That makes a maimer by his sister-in-law shalei medaita without her knowledge. So it's like against her will. Rebbe Mekana. Rebbe says it's since bia can be bal korcha, so to the Maimer can be Bal Korcha. And that's the case we're talking about over here is that in the case of Maimer, Bal Korcha, we don't need the father to receive it, the girl can receive it. My time of the Rebbe, what's the Rebbe's logic? Gomar mebiya di Yivama. Rebbe compares it to the action of the Torah. The Torah says, how do you acquire your sister-in-law through bia? Ma biya b'Yivama Bal Korcha, you don't need necessarily her consent because she's already tied to the brothers. Same thing when it comes to Maimer, the Rabbanan are just adding to the Torah. And the Rabbanan say, no. If Maimer has to be similar to Kiddushin, and by Kiddushin, she has to consent. Kiddushin. Ma Kiddushin the Madaita, Avachlam Madaita, also Madaita. And very quickly, my Kamifli, what's the argument? Rebbe Sava Mili the Yavama, since it's a matter that pertains to Yavama, it makes sense to compare it to other things of Yavama. And therefore, even Bal Korcha. And the Rabbanan hold Kiddushin. This act is merely Kiddushin. So take it in isolation. Therefore, we should learn from other Kiddushin. I have to go a few more lines right in the middle. It makes sense. The way that Yechon learns this Mishnah, we're talking about Kocha. Tani Sefer, it says in the Sefer, Masha ain't can be Kedushin. It says in the Sefer clearly, but Kedushin is different than Maimer. So why is Kedushin different than Maimer? It's the same thing. What are you mentioning Kedushin? The same. Because we're talking about Kocha. Like Kedushin, you cannot force her. Therefore, over there, it could only be the father. By Maimer, it can be forced. Therefore, it makes sense. It could be also Elam. What called Elam. Name it to have it Yufta Rish Lakish. Now it's a question of Rish Lakish then. Clearly, we make a distinction between Maimer and Kiddushin, but the Rish Lakish said that by Kiddushin, the girl can also accept it. So what's the difference in Maimer and Kiddushin? It's the same thing. Rish Lakish, Hamani Rabbi Yehudi, the author of this Mishnah here is Rabbi Yehuda, who said before, the Amar Ein Shtei Yadayim. He says that you can't have two people having rights at the same time. So we're asked right away, if it's Rabbi Yehuda, then why only make a distinction? Rabbi Yehuda, even by Gittin, the girl cannot accept it because you cannot have two people overlapping authority. In Hachinam, you're right. But I did the Tana Maimer, the Dami Kedushin, since we're talking about Maimer, and Maimer is similar to Kedushin, getting married to someone. So therefore, we're drawing a contrast between Kedushin and Maimer, even though you're right. According to this opinion, even by Geshin also, it would be different than Maimer. By Maimer, you can give it to her, not to the father, but not when it comes to Geshin. Tanami Mashain Kedushin. The one last line, but Rabbi Yehuda. So why talk to the difference? If Rabbi Yehuda holds that the girl cannot accept the get because he can't have two authorities overlapping, cannot accept kedushin. So how come my mind said she could? What's the difference? So we answer, Maimer is different because she's already attached to this man. There's a thing we learned in Yavam is called Zika. She's already bound. Remember, the Bishame holds this mamish ma'atoida. There's a certain bond there, an existing bond. It's not like you're getting married to a strange woman. There's no connection between the two. Here, there's an existing bond, and that's why you can force her, and that's why she can accept the get as well, because you're already tied together. Even before you gave her the Maimer, you already have a bond there. Saying, oh, now that you introduce this novel idea, it's a bond to all brothers, but each individually, and therefore, because the Maimer, what the Maimer achieves is not so much strengthening your bond, but canceling everyone else, severing everyone else's ties. So now that you're saying this, Rabbi Yechon go back to the question. Shiny Maimer, you want to know why Maimer is different than Kiddushin, and we get in the beginning we said because hey, you're leaving your father's domain, hey, you're coming back and you are not happy. What about a Maimer? You're leaving, and yet over there you can force. Now we introduce a new thing. You're not by Maimer, you're not leaving your father's domain. You already left your father's domain. You're already tied to the future brothers-in-law. The question is only which one. Shiny Maimer Hoyle this Kuku and Metas. You're already tied, so therefore let's go back to our very first answer. That Gittin, you are leaving your father, he's the only one who can pardon that. Kiddushin, you're going back home, the girl can accept it herself. Maimer, you already left your father. So what's the Maimer achieving? Not to further leave your father, is to sever the ties of the other brothers. So therefore, and therefore, you need to get whatever. So therefore, that's a